And I'm going to open again the script, which is wind turbine OCS data OCS Python library. So this uses the library we have installed and the configuration we've configured. Okay, so I'm going to go through these blocks of code, these snippets. Again, we're using Python here. So I'm going to run the first one, the first cell. So you can either run the cell in place, or you can click on this run over here, which basically runs the cell and then moves to the next cell. Okay. So the first cell basically just configures IntelliSense and basically autocomplete. So you can autocomplete functions when you start typing them. So this is just basic Python. In the next cell, we're importing a few classes. So we're importing the requests class because we're going to make API requests. We're also importing the config parser because we're going to read data from the configuration.ini file. We're importing JSON because we're going to use some JSON formatting and JSON functions. We're also importing pandas, which is a library in Python for creating data frames, creating and using data frames. We're also importing the date time, so you can use date functions. And of course, we're importing the OCS sample library preview, which we've installed. So this allows us to use the OCS library we've already installed. So I'm going to run that. The next step is connecting to OCS. So in this cell here, first we're adding a new variable, which belongs to the config parser library. So we're adding like a config object, and then we're reading the config.ini file, which we saw previously. And then we're connecting to OCS. So we're creating an OCS client object. And so to do that, we use a function called OCS client, and we pass to it the configuration values, which we have in the config.ini file. So here we're getting the API version, which is under the access group, and we're getting the tenant, the resource, which is the URL of the API endpoint, the client ID, and the client secret. So this allows us to connect to OCS, and we're also getting the namespace ID, which is under the namespace parameter, which is under the configurations group. So I'm going to run that. So we should now have a connection to OCS. In the next cell, this is where we access the data in the data view. So we're going to call the data view and get the results and store them in a data frame. So the first thing we're doing here is we're getting the dates, date from and date to. So what we're doing here, we're just using a Python script to basically get for date from to get the date 10 days ago. So we're going 10 days in the past, subtracting it from today's date. And in the date to, we're using today's date. So we're basically storing two variables. One is the date from, which is 10 days ago, and date to is today's date. We're also specifying a time interval. In this case, this is a string where we specify the time interval. That's the sampling rate, because when we retrieve data from data views, we specify from and to date, and we specify a sampling interval. Okay, so here we're specifying 1 minute sampling interval. So we're going to get data for the past 10 days, sampled every minute. Okay. We also specify the data view ID, and here we urge you to use the data view you have created in previous lessons. So the naming format we're using here is wind turbine data underscore your initials, and then the date, the date you're running the script, so today's date. And we try to use this format so it's consistent. So it's basically the 4-digit year, then the dash, then the 2-digit month number, then dash, then the 2-digit day number. Okay, and make sure that points to the data view you have created in the previous lessons. So if we go back here to OCS, if I access data views, make sure you find your data view here and then make sure you're pointing to it. Again, you should have created this in previous lessons. Okay, so make sure you specify the data view you have created. And then we're going to use one of the OCS client functions, which is, first we're going to get the OCS client object we've created in the previous cell. And we're going to call the function .dataviews.get data interpolated. So this gets interpolated data for that data view. And it requires these parameters, so namespace ID, data view ID, which we've already created here. And we specify a start index equal to date from, which is 10 days from 10 days in the past, and then end index, which is today's date. Again, you can specify different dates if you want to. So here in the comments commented out, we have date from and date to already set. So you can also set like your own dates, the absolute value of the dates. We're also passing the interval to the function. So in this case, we're passing this time interval variable, which is every 1 minute. And then we specify a count. The reason we're specifying that, and that's optional, is by default when we request data from data views, data is returned in pages, and each page would have 1,000 values, and then we would have to scroll through the different pages to get the rest of the values. So we're gonna scroll to the next 1,000 and so on till we get all the data. For this specific lab, we don't need to do that. Of course, it's best practice to do that, and it's recommended to do that in a production environment. And we have a documentation on that in the API documentation, which, again, just a reminder, you can access from OCS under API documentation. So in a production environment, it's preferable to specify a low page count. Again, by default, it's 1,000 if you don't specify it, and then move through the pages to build your data set that way. In this case, we're just going to get all the data in one shot. So we're specifying a count of 150,000 rows per page, and we know we would have less than that. We have around 140,000 rows. So we know in one page we'll get all the data. So after we get the data, that data is stored in this variable called data. And then what we're going to do is convert that to a data frame. So we're going to use pd.dataframe data just to convert that data into a data frame. Another thing we're doing here is we're making sure the timestamp column is converted to a timestamp object. So it's type timestamp because it's going to be string if we don't do that. And then after that, we're going to print the data frame. So let's run this block. It's going to take some time because it's requesting a lot of data from OCS. It's going to be around 140,000 rows. and then after it retrieves the data, it's gonna display the data frame, a summary of the data frame. Okay, so after this cell runs, you can see a sample of the data frame at the bottom here. So you can see we have around 144,000 rows, and you can see all the different columns with some of the data here shown. So you can see the timestamp, turbine, and all the other columns. So the blade value, the rotor speed, the active power, and air temperature and wind speed.